I didn't think anything would amaze me and surprise me anymore, Kay. But what I have come to feel is that what's going on in America is like the Houthis and the Tutsis killing each other in Rwanda. Something has infiltrated the population where hate and ignorance are ruling the day, not with people on the street, but with our highest courts and places of legislation. And so I don't think that with what's going on today, the rule of law, as we have known it, even applies anymore. So I'm upset. And I feel that the call to action, what can we do?
Welcome to Democracy on Fire. In this episode, we'll take a look at how the Supreme Court's recent decision gutting the Voting Rights Act is affecting the civil rights movement, how it could affect the midterm elections, and potential options going forward. My guest is Eleanor Andrews, one of Alaska's most celebrated businesswomen, a civic entrepreneur who has a long history in government as well as the private sector. Eleanor grew up in L.A., took a trip to Fairbanks to visit her father, and fell in love with Alaska, a state that, as she has said, offers opportunity for women and anyone with curiosity. That curiosity carried her from youth counselor in a state corrections facility to a commissioner running one of the largest departments in state government, to founder of the Andrews Group, a management services company she built from a one-woman operation into a thriving award-winning firm employing thousands over time. Eleanor has been involved in the civil rights movement for many decades, so I'm interested to get her reflections on how the movement stands in this moment. Welcome, Eleanor.
Kay, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Well, the Supreme Court has struck a body blow to the Federal Voting Rights Act, and as a result, states across the South have been trying to capitalize on this opportunity to dismantle decades of hard-won Black representation at all levels of government. And because of the loss of representation in Congress for Blacks, that could shift the balance of power and is of concern to all Americans. The bottom line is that states can now enact discriminatory maps with impunity. Blacks are the most immediately and dramatically affected, but it could also affect and discriminate against other minority groups. So yesterday, we're recording this on June 4th, the court went even further and just completely eviscerated Section 2 of the Act that prohibits racial discrimination in a ruling involving Alabama's map, and gave the green light for that map, which eliminates one of two Black majority districts to be used in this upcoming election. So it's having big ramifications, and some of the elections have been suspended, even though they've already been in process, so that states could go in and redistrict. And that's having effects that are concerning to a lot of people, and has obviously set things back many decades. So, Eleanor, tell me about your history in the civil rights movement.
Well, I didn't know I was involved in the civil rights movement at age 11, but I belong to a big Baptist church, in fact, the biggest Baptist church in California. So one Sunday morning, Martin Luther King, whom I'd not heard of, and Jesse Jackson showed up at our church. And they told a story about voting and people going down to the South and helping the Blacks there register to vote. I didn't know if that was an issue anyplace else in America, but after they gave that information, they asked for money. And I had my dollar that I was going to put in the collection basket. I gave it. And from that spring and summer on, I paid attention to what was happening in America. The next year, my parents took us to the South. They're both from Memphis, Tennessee. My dad had a vacation, and we would drive from LA to Memphis and back and have a vacation in between in 2 weeks. So we'd have 3 weekends. And was I shocked at what I learned on that first trip that people were treated differently, totally differently, under the law and customs and accommodations if you were colored. Those were the signs. No colored allowed. Colored use these broken rings on the ferry going across the Mississippi River. If you were colored, you couldn't go to the movies except through the back alley and sit in the third balcony. So I noticed some things, and I always been a person who's looking for solutions. And if I couldn't reason with people, I would tend to beat them up. So I've been beating up this system my whole life.
So, how are you feeling about the changes that are unfolding now?
I didn't think anything would amaze me and surprise me anymore, Kay. But what I have come to feel is that what's going on in America is like the Houthis and the Tutsis killing each other in Rwanda. Something has infiltrated the population where hate and ignorance are ruling the day, not with people on the street, but with our highest courts and places of legislation. And so I don't think that with what's going on today, the rule of law as we have known it even applies anymore. So I'm upset. And I feel that the call to action, what can we do? We certainly can't outraise people who are fomenting this hate and discontent. But you know what we can do? Each of us still has a vote. And those people that vote for those that are perpetrating these crimes have got to be disappointed because they were promised honey and milk in the promised land. What they've got now is a house they can't afford to buy, milk they can't get for their children, they can't put gas in their car, and everything they used to buy is unaffordable because of tariffs that go back and forth. So they're disappointed. They won't admit it. Most of them won't admit it until they're out of harm's way. But I have a feeling they're not going to be voting for those people so much anymore. Where on the other hand, people who have always been marginalized and have always had to fight for everything are going to fight harder and vote more. That's what I'm pushing.
We absolutely need a huge blue wave, and voting is the tool in the toolbox that we must rely on now to try to correct the situation. And, we have the midterm elections coming up here in a few months. And I've seen estimates that these changes might give the Republicans an additional 2 to 4 House seats in 2026, and maybe 8 or more additional seats in 2028 when the full impact of the decision will hit. And there's uncertainty right now because of litigation and special sessions that are still going on. But we should keep in mind that these pickups are not guaranteed because the new lines may not have the intended effects, especially if people become energized in this moment to push back and get involved and participate. It's been said that, the people who didn't vote had a bigger determination on the outcome than those who did in the last election when so many people just didn't bother. And we really have to turn that around. And I think about the 2018 midterms, which was in the middle of Trump's first term. And, his approval rating then was about 40%, and it's sunk now at least down to the mid 30s and even perhaps lower. The Democrats picked up 41 seats in that 2018 midterm election. And so there's a chance that if enough people show up and vote, we will have a similar result and be able to start repairing some of the damage.
And you know what I think drove that? People had the hope that they could go back to all the positive things that Americans came together on during the Obama administration. It wasn't so old that they'd forgotten how hope and action got him in office. And people got a little bit relaxed. And you got this charlatan, this, ringmaster coming in telling people all kinds of stories that couldn't possibly be true. And so that they went for it. We have short memories here. People don't take history. They don't even remember what happened last year. That's part of our downfall in this country. So they went for it, but Obama was fresh enough that they realized that they'd lost something and they tried to go back. But I think that it's almost like somebody put something in the water because without reason, people are turning on neighbors, on tradition, on education and precedent. And I think that the biggest dose of something in the water is Supreme Court. They are shameless. I'm not a lawyer and I never tried to guess what lawyers do because there's always the other hand. They keep litigating and deciding. But I've never seen a time in my whole grown life where the court can say, this is our answer, and we'll give you no explanation how we got there. We're the
Yeah,
majority.
that shadow docket, that's one of the reforms that needs to happen is we gotta get rid of that. They shouldn't just be able
Yes.
to issue these decisions in the middle of the night with, no explanation, and
Nope.
it's just chaotic
It is.
where it's left everything, and, is, very distressing, but I wanted to ask you, as you think about the gains that were made and have been made over time in the civil rights movement, and the obstacles obviously were very significant, as you mentioned earlier, and the tactics and the determination and the persistence that it took to overcome and prevail. And as you think about where we are now, do we need to repeat all of that? Or how is the movement going forward going to either look similar or different to the civil rights movement of the 60s?
Well, the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, it was a movement of basic American people, not just Black people, but women. When the first affirmative action laws were enacted, the biggest beneficiaries were white women because women had been so discriminated against in education, the workplace, everything, earning potential, that because they were white, they got in first, and Blacks and Mexicans and everybody else came in behind them. But in the end, everybody benefited. And I always thought that during this period of time in my life, when people who were afraid of losing, of not being in control anymore, the white male dominance in government in this country, when people saw a Black woman who could do what they were doing, a Mexican man with an accent that could perform that they could, a lot of that fear went away. But we've got someone who's clearly deficient surrounding himself with people even more deficient and ignorant. They are terrified, and they're pulling out all the stops to make sure that they don't lose their place. Like Hamilton said, they got their shot and they're afraid of losing it.
Well, their place is definitely in jeopardy, isn't it?
It
As
is, when you've always been the majority and you had no rules about what you did, no borders, and then you start counting, gosh, we're not the majority anymore. We're a majority minority country. What's going to happen? I've never heard of any group of people, women, ethnic minorities, whatever, foreigners, nationalized citizens say, we want to get those guys back. Everybody wants to move forward. There's so much opportunity and plenty for Americans, and we can solve problems together. Nobody wants retribution but our president. That's not how Americans are. I still believe that.
Yeah. So how are we gonna get everybody to show up?
Well, I never stop talking. I meet with two groups of women all the time, one every Friday, and they're a group of 8 women who used to counsel youth. And we attack the world's problems based on what we learned in our 20s about working with young kids that have problems. You keep talking, you display good behavior, and offer solutions. I meet with another group of women once a month who are some of the biggest policymakers and former elected people in the state. And we get together and we have a talking stick that a former judge carved for us. We pass it around and we say what we've got to say. And the thing is, what's said in the room doesn't leave the room, at least attributable to anybody. But we're kind of all saying the same things. We need to act. We've been sitting here on the fat of the land, and we need to do what we used to do, which is put feet on the street, talk to people, engage youth, and tell them how things really are versus the fairy tales that they get on Facebook and TikTok and TikTok. I I don't do social media because my brain cannot deal with that much fiction. But, it's too much trouble to separate the facts from what you get in Facebook. But some people I hear, that's the only place they get their news.
Yeah, the divided and fractured media environment is certainly a challenge. We're not all operating on the same set of facts and information, and there's dramatically different perceptions.
May I say one thing to correct you? There's only one set of facts. Those are the truth. Kellyanne Marianne Kelly,
Well,
whatever her
there's
name.
alternative facts,
Yeah, there's no such thing as alternative facts. It's the facts or BS, okay?
Right, exactly. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about was several people have suggested and proposed that the way we're going to need to fix this once there is a trifecta of Democrats in place in 2028 is by reforming the Supreme Court, by appointing additional people to overwhelm the reactionary majority. There are other ideas, term limits, ethics rules, disclosures, all kinds of things that need to be happening. Do you have thoughts about what we need to do to fix the Supreme Court?
I have thoughts on every one of the things you've mentioned. First of all, we don't need a small number of people deciding these things. It needs to be a nationwide conversation. Sometimes we have to take a look at what the Constitution knew at that time when everybody had the same lived experience and they came to the rules and the dictates of our Constitution. Things have changed. We have, remember that news show that was left, right, and middle? Well, we have a middle that didn't exist then, and it wasn't party related. It was just people who hadn't had a voice. Now there's an opportunity for everybody to have a voice. We need to have these conversations that the results need to be, in my opinion, a larger court because there are more people in the middle in this country that the court could reflect on. And certainly some rules of behavior and ethics. Who the hell does a court think they are? That they decide on the rules and ethics for every other entity in America except for themselves. That needs to change. They are not that supreme or superior.
Well, I think I agree with everything you just said, and we need to get this conversation going so that we build support for the solution so that
Yes,
when the voting happens, if we are successful in changing the regime, that we will have solutions in place. And I don't think it's too early to start figuring that out and building support for it. And as you said, voting is the key, and we've got to engage people in a way that they haven't been in the past. So I want to thank you, Eleanor, for being with me and sharing your wisdom of perspective. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I just want you to know that I truly, truly believe that the answer is voting. It's a right that has not been taken away. The court has tried to marginalize who we can elect, but if enough of us vote, it doesn't matter what they've done with the Civil Rights Act, because you know what? We can create one that's a little bit more foolproof. That's what I think.
Great. Well, gutting the VRA and erosion of Black and minority representation is yet more evidence that democracy is falling backwards. Democracy is on fire, and voting is how we extinguish the flames of fascism. Let's get America back on the path to an inclusive, multiracial, multicultural democracy where everyone has a chance to succeed. Let's stand with and support the civil rights leaders and organizations who are leading the way. We can do
agree.
this.
That's who we are as Americans. We need to recognize who we are and what's in our toolbox.
So let's do it. Thanks for watching and listening. Please like and share.
Thank you for having me. I'm on it.